Greetings, I'm Dr. Russell Jaffe, and it's my privilege and pleasure to discuss with you the science behind food and chemical sensitivity tests and testing. So who am I? I am a cross-trained physician trained in internal medicine and laboratory medicine, clinical pathology. I maintain a fellow status in a number of organizations, from the American Society for Clinical Pathology, the American College of Nutrition. I'm a scientific fellow of the American College of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology, a member of the FOCUS and FAMLI Laboratory Medicine Group, and I'm an overseas fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine. I am founder and chairman of PERC, Integrative Health, ELISA Act, Biotechnologies, and RMJ Holdings. They're all LLCs. You can reach me by email through the Health Studies Collegium. Notice rjaffe@4hsc.org. And you can look online for drrusselljaffe.com if you find you want to get more information and a deeper understanding of what we'll today discuss. So let's jump into delayed immune reactions and how they get revealed and accurately measured. So we're going to look at the foundations of functional immunology, that is clinically useful and relevant and understandable in practice immunology. We're going to look at food and chemical sensitivities, what they are and what they're not, and how do they form, and what do you do clinically to restore healthy tolerance. We'll review common testing methods, and we're going to look at the clinical evidence that detecting T and B cell lymphocyte reactions are essential, that accurately done, they are the gold standard because they concurrently measure all delayed hypersensitivity, and they're not interfered with by common false positives and false negatives. So by design, ex vivo is what we'll discuss and why it's so important to accurate delayed allergy testing. Now, the immune defense and repair system can be thought of as having a balance, when it's healthy, between defense and repair. So a healthy immune system defends you from anything foreign. It repairs you from daily wear and tear. It maintains tolerance, resilience, and balance. A healthy immune system means no allergies. It means immune tolerance to the world. It means that your immune system is robust enough that it can neutralize infections and allergens without distracting you or reducing your vitality or visiting upon you a chronic ill health. Now, defense work must take place first. Defense is the priority. Repair is the need. Both are important. And I'll mention that human beings typically have 50 billion wiggly dendritic cells, fibroblasts, granulocytes, macrophages, etc., each that can engulf and recycle up to 50 pathogenic organisms or foreign invaders, and then break them down in the lysosome recycling center to individual building blocks that the body can then use to build itself back up. That's a healthy immune system, and that's what you want. Now, in contrast, autoimmune common conditions are becoming much more common. We used to think that they were quite uncommon. Now we're seeing them in many, many chronic ill health conditions. At least 23.5 million Americans, according to the review article that we have on the bottom of this slide, 80% women, more than 80 diseases, and autoimmunity is different from autoimmune disease. So in other words, you can break tolerance and be on your way to a self-attacking autoimmune disease, but not yet earn the diagnosis. And we want to distinguish, if you're early in the process, how to restore tolerance effectively, and if you've been at it a while and are chronically unwell, how to restore yourself over time. And I'll be sharing with you specific cases that have been provided by our specific colleagues who have put this test to their clinical test and found it quite satisfying, in fact, delivering results that no other technology is able to do. So in autoimmune conditions, tolerance is lost and self-attack is on the way. If we now look at the immune defense and repair system, we know that there are at least two major divisions in it. If you look at the right part of the slide first, you see innate immune system reactions. These are non-specific. These are surveillance reactions: engulf, recycle, renew. And if you look on the left side, when the immune system is being attacked, it wants to enhance itself. And we call these adaptive immune system responses. They are specific, they are acquired, they are there to protect and to remember things to which you're sensitive, so that they can give you feedback to say whether you should get exposed to this food, chemical, or environmental substance or not. This involves both B-class lymphocytes that make antibodies that can either be helpful or harmful. We'll talk more about that. And it definitely includes the helper and suppressor Th1, Th2 systems of cells, the T cells, the thymus-derived cells, and others that are specific to the acquired reactions and measurable in a cell culture, uniquely measurable in a cell culture. If we take a look and a brief review at the innate and adaptive immune systems or immunity, you see on the right part of the slide, the B cells and the T cells overlapping with the innate immune system seen on the left side of the slide, which includes those dendritic wiggly cells, mast cells, macrophages, basophils, eosinophils, etc. And together they share certain aspects of T cell function and certain aspects of the natural killer cell activity that is essential for removing cancerous or abnormal cells that do form in most people and need to be eliminated by a natural technique called apoptosis, which is just a fancy word for programmed removal of abnormal cells. Now, there are many microbiomes of which the immune system is responsible. In your skin, which is the largest organ of your body, and it is an accessory organ of excretion when necessary. The nose and mouth and lungs and GI tract, and basically there are many, many microbiomes that make up the whole person. And we want to eliminate foreign invaders before they get in, if possible, at the surface. And if not, we want to engulf them, recycle them, break them down, and let them do no harm. So the adaptive immune responses are cell-mediated. This includes T cells that migrate to lymphocytes that produce antigen responses or antigen stimulation. And then these are brought to memory T cells or cytotoxic cells or helper cells, depending on the particular individual in need. And there is this interaction between the cell-mediated, antibody-mediated systems. Antibody-mediated means B cells, B-class lymphocyte cells. And on antigen stimulation, plasma cells can form. Plasma cells are factories to produce antibodies, but it's important to know that those could be beneficial neutralizing antibodies or harmful reactive antibodies, and we need to distinguish them. And there are memory B cells that can be anamnestically re-excited. And all of this can be assessed and meaningfully measured in a proper cell culture. On the next slide, we see natural killer cell and virus cell coming together. This is a colorized scanning electron micrograph. The blue is the lymphocyte. The red is the abnormal cell, the virus transfected cell. And the natural killer cell is going to leave a marker that other cells will recognize and eliminate that abnormal cell. On the next slide, we see T and B cell responses over time. The initial response is usually IgM that can occur within a few days to weeks of exposure, depending on how robust the immune responses are. And the IgM large antibodies do not stay with you, but over time, a protective immunity can develop. This is beneficial. And so the blue is the IgM, the purple is the IgG, and in healthy people, once we develop natural immunity and neutralizing capacity to a foreign invader, that stays with us for life. That's a good thing when it's neutralizing. And when it's not, we'll tell you what to do about it. So, a healthy immune system is balanced and tolerant. It defends, repairs, and removes, and helps you survive the 21st century. An overburdened immune system, as you see on the next slide, has so much defense work that it dominates, and there's a repair deficit because repair is deferred when there's an excess of defense that's needed. An overburdened immune system means immune dysfunction and chronic disease likely. So food and chemical sensitivities are often sources of hidden immune burdens. They're sometimes called occult because they're hard to find without accurate lymphocyte response assay testing. They're also known as delayed allergies that dispose to ill health and chronic disease. They're also known as delayed type hypersensitivity. DTH is the acronym that's sometimes used in immunology. This is different than digestive intolerance. So you can have a weak digestion without immune responses, and you need to rehabilitate that. But most people with a weak digestion also have delayed hypersensitivities. And so when you reduce the burden on the immune system by accurately measuring the hypersensitivities and then encourage people to eat a diet that they can digest, assimilate, and eliminate easily without immune burden, keeping a healthy transit time of 12 to 18 hours, having enough prebiotic fiber and probiotic organisms, and recycled glutamine, the symbiotic that is essential to energize and repair the lining mucosal cells, the lining cells of your digestive tract. So if you want to restore a weak digestion, identify delayed hypersensitivities and follow that plan of tolerance restoration, while also encouraging people to eat what they can easily digest, assimilate, and eliminate while they're repairing their digestive microbiome. Now, immediate allergies. Runny noses, itchy eyes, sinusitis, recurrent sneezing without a source. These are known as the immediate allergens, type 1. They are acute in the sense that the exposure is followed within seconds to minutes by the reaction. They're measurable by RAST tests, which measure only IgE responses. And they're known as histaminic because they're highly amplified when the cells release their contents on stimulation from whatever is the antigenic or stimulating source. Now, in contrast, immediate allergy occurs after the second exposure, so you get sensitized first and then you can have the reaction. IgE is specific to that antigen and it binds to mast cells. Mast cells release the mediators. They're known as inflammatory mediators, but they're really trying to stimulate repair. And this includes histamine and a variety of other amines that are concentrated in granules in the mast and similar cells that on sensitization get released in order to stimulate repair, but they also bring with them the symptoms of immediate reactions. So type 1 symptoms do include hives, wheezes, itching, and anaphylactic reactions. And if we look at the next slide, we see delayed allergies, types 2, 3, and 4, with type 2 being the reactive and harmful IgG or IgG subtype antibodies, IgM and IgA, and secretory IgA. Type 3 are the immune complexes. Type 4 are T-cell mediated, and we'll discuss each of those. But as you can see in the visual, the LRA by ELISA Act measures concurrently all these reactions and picks up only the harmful, not the helpful reactions. So by doing a lymphocyte response assay in the ex vivo way we do, what we find is an accurate, reproducible technology that has been put to the test in a number of clinical outcome studies, and I'll briefly talk about them. And then I'll talk about some individual cases that reflect how this comprehensive, highly personalized, yet highly evidence-based approach works. So reactive or neutralizing antibodies the type 2 reactions, are antigen specific, and the antibody and antigen form a complex. You see on the right what looks like a green Y, because antibodies have two variable sides and one fixed side. And the antigen is something that's visualized here with different shapes, because each antigen has a different conformation or shape. So antibody antigen activates amplifying complement cascade. So not only do you have this complex that forms, but when it is complement fixing, it amplifies the reaction in order to enhance repair, although sometimes this enhances symptoms. So complement fixing, provocative IgG, IgM, and IgA are harmful. Neutralizing antibodies, in contrast, are helpful. And a measurement of antibody tells you nothing about its function, tells you nothing about whether it's harmful or helpful. That's where the lymphocyte distinguishes. The lymphocyte does recognize and respond to the harmful, but not the helpful antibodies. Now, immune complex are type 3. These are antibody-antigen complexes that provoke reaction. Technically, it's an IgM antibody that wraps around and is anti or against the IgG antigen complex. Because when you have an IgG antigen that is capable of fixing complement, and that comes in contact with a blood vessel, it harms the blood vessel. Temporal arteritis was the first and best described type 3 condition, but now we know there are a number of responses where the body is protecting itself with an IgM to wrap around and prevent the IgG antigen complex from harming the body further. This is, of course, not type 1. IgE binds to mast cells. And when you form an immune complex, IC on the bottom left is immune complex. When you form an immune complex that damages blood vessels, it can damage the lining cells of the liver, the Kupffer cells. It can damage the sinusoidal cells of the spleen that are necessary to clean the blood as it flows through those organs. So kind of important. And then we have the T cell mediated or type 4 reactions where macrophages engulf food antigens and process them and then deliver them to lymphocytes, including T cells, that can release cell signaling interleukins, fat-derived amplifying molecules, and start an immune cascade that leads to inflammation rather than repair. And that's because the body doesn't have enough of the essential nutrients to do the repair and complete it and restore tolerance in the immune system. And we'll talk about that work that we have been pioneering and advancing for decades. So delayed allergies and reactive lymphocytes, there are 3 types, type 2, 3, and 4. You see that on the left upper side. Reactive antibody, in contrast to the helpful antibody. Immune complexes and direct T cell mediated responses where there's no antibody. And it turns out in the immune system, the T cells may be even more important than the B cells. So going back 3.5 decades, it was my privilege to develop the first cell culture that is accurate and reproducible. And it applies to many comorbid conditions that are food reactive based or delayed allergy based. And here you see type 1, 2, 3, 4, and intolerance, that is like digestive intolerance. And if you look, you see very common conditions from asthma to chronic fatigue, enteropathy, fibromyalgia, hepatitis, rhinitis. Almost anything with an itis means an inflammatory response, which to us means a repair deficit. And we see repair deficits as opportunities to overcome these reactive situations. Now, from dysbiosis and maldigestion to lactose intolerance to most celiac syndromes to IgA deficiency and maldigestion, gluten sensitivity. Gluten is a hard to digest molecule, and if you have an intolerance or a weak digestion, you would be better to be gluten-free. That means no grains, but you can have all sorts of grasses and all sorts of fruits and vegetables and all sorts of healthy seeds, nuts, sprouts, spices, etc. So hidden immune burdens are delayed hypersensitivities, often called delayed allergies. They're hard to find prior to the LRA by ELISA ACT test because the reactions, the symptoms, what the person feels, can be 3 hours to 3 weeks after the exposure. So even a perfect history, a perfect diet record, will not tell you much about the Schwartzman reactions, the Arthus reactions, the serum sickness reactions, these delayed hypersensitivities that we're going to explain and tell you what to do about. So symptoms are often not specific. The reactors drain vitality, you feel unwell, your get up and go, got up and went, and it's hard to find it. So we urge and recommend delayed hypersensitivity testing, and now I'd like to briefly review the in vitro test tube methods, their limitations, and the ex vivo, high precision successful outcome study based LRA by ELISA ACT, lymphocyte response assay, the way we do it. So in vitro tests are available. You can measure antibodies, but I think that's misleading because you can't tell whether it's a helpful or a harmful antibody. And you need to know function. You can do particle size tests. There are machines that will measure particles of different size, but not everything at the same volume or everything at the same size is the same. And so we have pointed out that looking at particles does not tell you what the particles are there doing. You have to actually observe, as we do. And there are mediator release or cytokine release technologies that are available, and we want to discuss their puts and takes, their benefits and limitations. So ex vivo, high precision, successful outcome study-based lymphocyte response tests are what we recommend, LRA, and we have the high sensitivity LRA, which means less than 3% variance on sequential blind split samples. So the test is highly reproducible, been demonstrated so in multiple clinical outcome studies and others, and I'd like you to know at least some of the headlines about what makes it so special. Now, to review about serology, the antibody testing, whether you're measuring IgG or IgG4, whether you include IgA and secretory IgA, whether you measure IgM. You're doing serology, you're measuring immune responses in the test tube, and you can quantify the intensity of the antibody that is present, but not its function. You cannot tell good from bad. It's not possible when you do a serum serology test tube in vitro antibody test. Often this gives a long list of items to avoid with the assumption that if it reacts, it's harmful, and it does not distinguish the many false positives and false negatives. Because if you're not measuring T cells, you're missing very important aspects of delayed hypersensitivity, delayed allergies. And if you think everything at a certain size or every antibody is harmful, that's just biologically not correct. Our body makes neutralizing protective antibodies that should stay with us. Now, there are particle size tests, the so-called automated cytotoxic test. The device measures blood particles at 10 microns, everything at 10 microns. It turns out there's lots of things at 10 microns. Red cell rouleau, that means the red cells tend to stack with each other because of electrochemical changes that occur after you draw the blood. Platelet clumps can be 10 microns. Granulocyte debris can be 10 microns. It's a low specificity, not predictive test, and based on Hodson and Zwickie's publication, not reproducible. So when they sent blind split samples to particle size testing laboratories, they found they didn't reproduce themselves, which is at least a beginning. Your test should at least, if you do a blind split, you should get very similar results. Mediator release technology or MRT testing is available, somewhat like ALCAT. You measure the volume change after exposure to various antigens. It's an indirect test, not looking directly at the lymphocytes the way we do. And it uses markers to imply reaction. About 150 items can be tested. And from my point of view, it is a valuable laboratory tool, but not a clinically useful one for reasons I'll explain as we go along. Now, the lymphocyte response assay, the HSLRA with less than 3% variance on results, is known as the ELISA-ACT method. It directly observes lymphocytes under conditions similar to the body. It is truly ex vivo. That is, the sample is drawn without any activation and damage. All 3 delayed pathways are measured. Very few false positives, less than 1% from what we can tell. Intolerances, if any, can then be detected and digestion strengthened. Here we look at the results of the HSLRA cell culture, non-reactive lymphocytes on the left, reactive lymphocytes on the right. I think you can see that the reactive lymphocytes are reacting. If we did special other studies that we don't routinely do, we could actually show you that the halos or those rims of light are due to the activation of specific lymphocytes in that specific response to that specific substance that's been coated onto a novel microtiter plate that allows us to do this reaction. So with regard to the lymphocyte response assay, the amplified advanced cell culture test, we can now measure over 500 substances, foods, additives, and preservatives, the largest array in the world, environmental chemicals, toxic minerals and heavy metals, medications, molds, dander, hair, feathers, herbs. There are many things to which people can react because they're foreign to the body, and the body should exclude them. On the next slide, we see LRA advances now we can know. Precision because of reproducibility plus comprehensive immune assessment equals unmatched clinical value. And then on top of that, we know how to interpret the results and provide an personalized action plan for each individual. Now let's contrast the standard ELISA, the one introduced by Burson and Yellow in the 1950s, with ELISA-ACT. On the left, you see the standard ELISA. It's an IgG test. It's a 5-step procedure. It's called a sandwich for a variety of reasons, laboratory reasons. It's not a sandwich you would eat. But each step adds 3 to 4% variance. That's just a law of laboratory medicine. So the best ELISA IgG assays have 15 to 20% variance because they're 5 steps, each contributing a certain amount of error. In contrast, ELISA-ACT LRA is the first 1-step amplified reaction. And we were privileged to identify and patent the reaction where we brought together for the first time amplified testing, that's the ELISA side, and advanced cell culture technique, the ACT. And how did we do that? Well, we used an enzyme in the surface of the lymphocyte that is inactive when the cell is resting and is the enzyme that sends the signal to the nucleus to begin to divide when it's activated. So you're looking at the earliest steps of mitosis with a very high signal-to-noise ratio for those of you who are engineers. And we validated the procedure in the early 1980s. We put it to the test clinically. We put it to the test analytically. And we have persevered over the decades, adding experience and built upon the less than 3% variance on consecutive blind split samples. No dropout of data. LRA by ELISA-ACT lab procedures basically include the following. The sample is received and it's cool because you want to slow metabolism during transport. It wants to be cool, but not too cold. You don't want to freeze it, but you want it to slow its metabolism down. We gently spin the sample to remove the red cells. And this gentle spin, known as a modification of the Born and Cross technique, allows you to get cell-rich plasma. We do not do what many other people do, which is make a Buffy coat, isolate that, resuspend those lymphocytes, and see how they react in vitro in the test tube. We actually gently spin. Then we take the cell-rich plasma and we take 45 microliters of that cell-rich plasma added to each of the wells on the plate. There are 48 wells on each plate. And we look at the pre-coded purified antigen being tested. In fact, we isolate and purify all of the antigens that we use because we are biochemists and because it's important to not just assume that a commercial jar that says rutabaga has only rutabaga antigen in it. In fact, the way we do the procedure is to extract the soluble and reactive antigens, the soluble and reactive antigens. And then we have a novel buffer that is volatile. So the buffer goes away. We're left with the purified antigen that is filtered and then applied one antigen or one substance per well. We incubate for 3 hours at near body temperature, and then we immediately observe the reactions. Now, it's very important to look at the issue of split sample reproducibility. And here you see data that we presented a few years ago at the American Society for Investigative Pathology, Experimental Biology. This is, if you will, the high priest of laboratory medicine. And we reported 4,138 consecutive blind split samples with, as you can see, if you look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth, the column 1 to the left of the end, the number of percent items unmatched was 2.25 plus or minus 2.75%. It shows that we're even better than the less than 3%, but we say less than 3% for ease. This is over 3 years, 2011 to 2014, and my colleague Adam Lynch and I presented this in San Diego a few years ago. 2016 is the publication. So reproducibility is a necessity. It's rarely talked about by labs because it doesn't make them look very good, and we want you to know how reproducible is this cell culture. In fact, there are people who will say, it's hard to do a cell culture with that kind of precision. Come to our lab, we'll show you how to do it. So the LRA technology is made possible because of patented microtiter plates. You see a picture of one. Because of the purified antigens, and because of the observable results, so we know we're looking at lymphocytes that have reacted, not debris, not something released indirectly, but observing directly the B, T, and immune complex activated lymphocyte white blood cells. Now, the LRA technology is made possible in part because of that patented microtiter plate system, but there's also the proprietary blood collection tube. Because not only do we want to draw the blood, do we want to obtain the specimen without activation or damage, but as or more importantly, we want the specimen that gets to the lab to be ready to respond metabolically and biochemically. And we developed a novel blood collection system, including a novel anticoagulant that meets the need of putting the cells into suspended animation, in a sense, that puts the cells, they are able to respond just as they do in the body after being shipped to the lab. So LRA technology, lymphocyte cell cultures are possible because of the novel microtiter plate, the proprietary blood collection system, and the specialized collection and shipment of the specimen. There's a cool pack, 1 or 2 of them, that goes in with the specimen. You want to have this at refrigerated temperature before it's sent out. And there are certain rules that we can explain in detail to you, and following the rules leads to good specimens that lead to good results. If the negative control is negative, if the positive control is not positive, and we do this with every specimen has a negative and positive control. And that helps us know that the cells are not pre-activated, so the negative control is negative, and that they can respond because the positive control is positive. And that allows us to compare people with themselves, which is helpful in getting more precise results. So the LRA cell cultures are possible because of these novel microtiter plates and the way they're prepared, the blood collection system, the specialized collection and shipment process, the antigen purification, and the unique patient preparation. because you do need to be off certain immunosuppressive medicines for about 4 days. You need to avoid aspirin and antihistamines for 2 days. And we can help work with any specific situation that may come up clinically. So in addition to the LRA test, there's the LRA Immune Enhancement Program. How do we restore tolerance? Well, we include a personalized health assessment questionnaire, affectionately known as an HAQ, Health Assessment Questionnaire. And if we have that information plus the results of the LRA test, we can be specific about supplements, activity, and environmental recommendations to enhance and restore immune tolerance and achieve remission in any ill health. We do have a rotation diet option. We do have a digital book called The Joy in Living the Alkaline Way that many colleagues use for patient education and have the patient then download it so that at home they can re-review the useful information, the practical side of the results, to evoke human healing. And that is indeed the goal of everything we do. Now let's talk about a few cases. Here's chronic fatigue. A person was amazed by the fast recovery from a 4-year struggle with chronic fatigue syndrome and depression. The punchline, the bottom line is, I never thought I could be this healthy again. If we look at the next slide, we know that the LRA is indicated for immune dysfunction and autoimmune conditions for any chronic ill health, and it is indicated to optimize performance and recovery so that the body can be tolerant and yet resilient to the 21st century challenges. We have multiple successful outcome studies. Here's one that was published in the Journal of Musculoskeletal Pain some years ago. We have the most successful outcome study results in fibromyalgia. And in a 6-month best effort community-based program, there was 50% less pain as reported by the subject, 70% less depression, 50% more energy, 30% less stiffness. And we have followed a number of these folks over time, and they've continued to do well, consuming much lower resources because they're feeling so much better. And Claire Musicant wrote a book some years ago called Fibromyalgia, My Journey to Wellness, about her experience with this approach and the experience of other people that she knew. Now, in this case-controlled outcome study, everyone started on best standard of care. So if you look on the far left, you see 100% before, and in essence, we call that normalized. That's the starting point. At the midpoint, you see all 3 groups: the control group, which is in magenta, the primary fibromyalgia, which is in a kind of green, and the secondary complex fibromyalgia, which is in a kind of tan. At 6 months, which is much more important than the 3-month time point, at 6 months, both of the experimental groups continued to improve. And the placebo group fell back to about where they were before. It turns out there is a powerful placebo effect, but it doesn't last very long. And we want to contrast that with our tolerance restoring, very personalized and yet effective program, in this case for fibromyalgia. I'd also like to commend to you our 2 studies in diabetes. Both type 1 and type 2 were studied. Everyone started on best standard of care according to the American Diabetes Association, and the experimental group implemented our plan. The control group was randomized. That is, they made changes, they just weren't based on the LRA testing. And gosh, there was a more than 1% reduction in hemoglobin A1C in both the type 2 population and the type 1 population that followed best efforts to follow our recommendations. There was also an 18% reduction in insulin levels in the type 2 diabetics, the type 2 diabetes people. When you reduce hemoglobin A1C by a full percent, you're adding many years of quality life. In our database, when we made up this slide, there were over 70,000 cases and 30 plus years of experience. It's more than that now. And there are many anecdotes, individual reports, a few of which I want to share with you about the outcomes. Here's a migraine case. Person hadn't had any migraines once they started the LRA program after having had them for 20 plus years. It's great to be free of the migraine headaches. Professor Egger in Germany showed many years ago with very elegant food challenges that at least 88% of migraines in his experience were due to delayed food chemical hypersensitivities. What about chronic illness? Dr. Norm Schwartz, our colleague from Milwaukee, says that LRA is the most reliable and effective solution to solving my patients' chronic health conditions. And we have a number of case studies, which we're happy to share with you, depending on your particular interests and needs. And now I'd like to share with you a case of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It's an autoimmune thyroid issue due to the blood-thyroid barrier not being repaired. And here you have a 30-year-old woman diagnosed with Hashimoto's, 7 years of symptoms prior to the proper diagnosis. And that is common, that people go through periods of suffering before the thyroiditis is identified. The symptoms included fatigue, muscle weakness, joint pain, weight gain, bloating and digestive distress. Initially treated with Synthroid T4 and Euthyrox, which is a European formulation not available in North America. When the LRA tests were done, there were 20 items, including the nightshade family, trichophytin, benzaldehyde, and methylene chloride. The implementation, including substituting for the reactive items, and we can help guide you as to where you might get an exposure to these items. Personalized supplementation and an alkalinizing lifestyle program based on the LRA by ELISA Act results. The outcome? Initially, energy levels dramatically improved, pain reduced, thyroid meds reduced. This is the best I have felt in years, says the client. Here's another case of thyroiditis. 36-year-old woman, 5 pregnancies, 3 children, low energy. She's 18 kilograms. That's about 38 pounds over what her weight should be. Little joy in life. Morning temperature often less than 98 degrees Fahrenheit. And Broda Barnes, among others, has pointed out that when you're easily cold or when your temperature in the morning is below 98 consistently, you should think about thyroid dysfunction. The pituitary and thyroid are not interacting properly with each other. Now, as is commonly the case, the routine T3 and T4 studies were unremarkable within lab range. However, the additional tests showed a low free T3, a normal free T4, increase in TSH, an increase in 2-hour glucose and insulin, an increase in free cortisol stress hormone, and a decrease in DHEA, the hormone that balances cortisol. So the overloaded immune system can induce repair deficits. The thyroid gland is attacked with increase in tissue permeability, a loss of thyroid function, and what we call autoimmune thyroiditis, sometimes called Hashimoto's thyroiditis for the pathologist who first identified it and published about it. Now, in this case, combining the LRA test and the health appraisal questionnaire, the person was asked to substitute for cow dairy, MSG, arsenic, sulfite, and chloroform. Individualized nutrients and alkalizing lifestyle program were recommended and followed to some extent. The person had 2 grains of desiccated thyroid when the morning temperature was less than 98 degrees. They used green dichromatic lights and salt and soda baths to help balance out their stress response and reduce cortisol while increasing DHEA. After just 6 months of best efforts, the person was asymptomatic, had lost 10 kilograms of weight, that's 22 pounds. They had discontinued the supplemental thyroid hormones because they're repairing the blood thyroid barrier, and now the thyroid was getting back to function. Free cortisol and DHEA, glucose and insulin had all normalized as beneficial effects of this comprehensive program. Here's a case of ulcerative colitis. 31-year-old woman, diagnosed 10/13. She had done an over-the-counter cleanse just a few months before that triggered bloody stools. She had a large polyp removed from the small intestine as an infant. That's part of her past medical history. And her mother was diagnosed with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. Initially, she was treated with Lialda with very limited benefits. But on the next slide, you see that she had 18 reactions out of many hundreds of items tested by the LRA. She was asked to substitute corn, black tea, olive, xanthan gum, orange, ginger, pinene, and food dyes. And the implementation was to substitute, to the extent possible, to take the supplements, which in this case was a super multi, along with essential omega-3, 6, 9 fatty acids, bone-building nutrients, recycled glutamine, that is recycled with PAC for energy in the digestive tract, comprehensive probiotic, a blood-building complex based on ferrous aspartate, the easily assimilated iron, hydroxycobalamin, the preferred form of B12, and polyphenolics, along with ascorbate to enhance immune function. Took a year and a half, but the CBC was now normalized, hemoglobin of 12.9, CRP was now down to 1.14, and while we'd like it to be less than 0.5, this is pretty good. The ferritin was 14, where 40 to 70 is optimal. Patient continued on Asacol, although they were slowly reducing it from 6 a day to 3 a day, and I've heard more recently further reductions. Weight was back up. This was someone who wasn't assimilating their food well. They weren't digesting and assimilating their food well. So weight is back up to 132 pounds. Person remains amenorrheic, but breast tissue is coming back. Acupuncture once a month. The family is healthier, as reported. The husband lost weight. The kids are eating healthier. Repeat the LRA plan every 6 months until you've restored tolerance, as indicated by few, if any, reactions on the entire panel of LRA tests. So in summary, healthy immune system is tolerant. There are no delayed allergies. Food and chemical sensitivities are all over the place, although they've been hard to identify prior to the LRA system. Lymphocyte reactions, LRA lymphocyte reactions, identify all 3 types of delayed allergies without false positives and false negatives. It's become the gold standard LRA that delivers less than 3% variance and over 30 plus years of clinical evidence in support. Here's a case about fatigue and sleep. A 52-year-old fellow comes in for chiropractic care. He has neck pain and stiffness with intermittent fingertip dysesthesias, paresthesias, pins and needles in his fingers, fatigue, poor sleep, and he's just tender everywhere. Lab showed a high cholesterol, triglycerides, and blood sugar, and a low vitamin D. The intervention included the alkalinizing plan, avoid sugar, remove dairy, eat more frequently of foods that you can digest, assimilate, and eliminate without immune burden. Sleep 7 to 9 hours a night so that you can get restorative sleep and repair. Decrease alcohol intake and follow the nutritional supplementation based on the HAQ Health Appraisal Questionnaire and the LRA tests. In this case, that meant a comprehensive super multivitamin, 3 per day to keep the urine sunshine yellow. Vitamin D, 20 drops a day, which is 10,000 IU. And you monitor calcium at 2 weeks if the patient is on thiazides, water pills, hydrochlorothiazide being the most common. And you do the vitamin D to bring them into a healthy range. There is a concern about vitamin D and warfarin, although I think the literature is reducing, they're producing evidence that that in people who are comprehensively managed, the anticoagulant warfarin does not contraindicate vitamin D supplementation. The expected outcomes include glucose control, decreased musculoskeletal pain, better energy levels. In this case, the physician recommended magnesium, 3 per day. That's 330 milligrams of elemental magnesium, and checking the vitamin D that requires magnesium in its conversion process. So you must bring the magnesium into the cell, and we have enhanced uptake and chaperone delivery forms of magnesium. You must bring the magnesium into the cell to buffer metabolic acids to activate ATP. It takes 1 molecule of magnesium per ATP for the cell to get the benefit of that energy. And this person was given a glucose regulation formula that includes standardized corosolic acid, French lilac, bitter melon, known as Mara, chromium and vanadium in balanced amounts, 1 to 2 with each meal. Indeed, chromium deficiency is associated with severe insulin resistance, hyperglycemia, hypertriglyceridemia, and painful neuropathy. In this case, omega-3 fats were supplemented 3 per day. That's 990 milligrams of EPA and 750 milligrams of DHA. And what we say is you need DHA for brain and body, you need EPA for body and brain. You do need both. You can't get by with the precursors because they're not efficiently converted in most people to the active EPA and DHA, and you need both. Now, B complex, including B6, B12, folate, etc., 3 per day to reduce homocysteine levels and improve methylation, which is important to do. And the follow-up is better family relationships. The wife comes to the appointments. 1 week on supplements and dietary changes, and the person's sleeping better, increased energy, eating more frequently, but healthier. I'm very grateful for this colleague's support and care. How about a case of rashes and hives? A 58-year-old woman diagnosed with rashes and hives. Symptoms included the rashes, hives, blisters on the hands, itching, throat closing, and brain fog. The therapeutic plan was to follow the LRA testing, and it showed cow dairy, potato, sulfite, food colorings, preservatives, and organophosphates. In just 2 weeks of substitution and best efforts, reduction in rashes, blisters are gone, significant skin improvements. How about ADHD and energy depletion fatigue? A 50-year-old woman diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, initially on Adderall as a prescription. She reports lack of restorative sleep, decreased energy, weight gain, and mild alopecia. The therapeutic interventions included LRA tests, immune enhancement program. She was asked to substitute for gluten, titanium dioxide, sulfite, and salicylates. The implementation plan included substitution for the reactive items, nutrients that included a super multi, repair polyphenolics, bone building nutrients, and adrenal support formula, and an alkalinizing lifestyle program. In less than a month, appetite control. 2 months, sleep rhythms returned to normal. 3 months, alopecia gone, no loss of hair, night tremors gone, reactions down at least 50% according to the individual. 4 months, energy levels high, sleeping well, and focus improved. And I'm Russ Jaffe, and it's been a privilege over these decades to continue advancing the cause of functional immunology through LRA tests, ELISA Act programs, and we encourage you to look at the PERC Integrative Health Academy. We encourage you to be well and happy and restore tolerance in your immune system so that you can live long and well. Thank you.